What's up, guys? Today we are going to be doing a full Wisefab install on our Formula Drift 350Z. We got the front kit, we got the rear kit, we got the rack relocation. We're going to go through step by step on how to install it, tips and tricks on the way, and yeah. All right, so here we have our entire left front kit for the Wisefab. Couple of different things you can see on it. We've got the front knuckle. These are actually, you're able to use a 370 or a 350Z wheel bearing. They come with a little spacer, so when you're using the 350 wheel bearing, it fits in there nice. It's got the bolt holes on the brakes for a 350 or a 370, so you can run lots of different brake options. We have on-car adjustable front upper control arms. One of the good things about the Wisefab kits is they come pre-adjusted. So as long as your chassis is not bent, you should be able to bolt this thing on and be pretty close right out of the box. Not a whole lot of messing around with it. Makes everything a little bit easier. We've also got, these are the offset rack spacers. So if you were not going to do the rack relocation, this would bolt onto the rack and relocate the arm for you. So if you don't have the ability to do the relocation, you can use these and it'll work just as well. All right, so here's the full, this is the left rear kit. A lot of stuff going on with the rear kit. We have multiple adjusting holes for sway bar. We have adjustments, a whole bunch of different adjustments in the knuckle. We have a bolt-on, this is our anti-squat bracket. So this bolts onto the subframe and moves the control arm from, this is the factory hole, and it moves it up to here. And you can go back and forth. Typically you'll use a bottom hole for lower traction settings, things like rain. And then for the most part, you mostly just leave it up in the upper anti-squat hole. Gives you a little bit more bite. On the knuckle here, we have this slot here is our on-car toe gain adjustment. So if you need a little bit more forward bite or side bite, you can adjust the toe gain. So basically when the suspension squats, moving this bolt from a lower to an upper position can adjust the amount that the car toes in the back. It's as simple as loosening the bolt up, slide it up, tighten it back up. You can do it right on the car. Makes everything really easy. Okay, so on the top of the knuckle we have these notches here. This is our camber adjustment. They make things really easy. You can move this one notch at a time is 1.3 degrees of camber, or you can flip it around and go do a half a notch, which is 0.6 degrees. That makes it really easy at the track. Say you're running a half degree of camber and you're getting a whole bunch of weird tire wear on one side. You can simply do a half a notch or a full notch if you need to. And then, you know, if you go back to another track or whatever, you don't have to mess with any of your alignment settings. You can simply just move one notch at a time and go back and forth, and everything stays equal and happy. We have all of the arms. You can see they label everything, make it really easy for the install. They're also labeled on the knuckle, so you know which arm goes where. It also makes it easy if you need to order spare parts. You can go on the website, order, you know, a number 5 arm for a rear of a 350Z, and you know you're getting the right one. Some other stuff with the rear knuckle, we have dual caliper mounting already built in. You could run a couple different versions of different calipers on here. We also have multiple mounting holes for wheel bearings. You can run 350Z, 370Z, 240SX, a bunch of different options for wheel bearings depending on the rest of your setup and what you have for axles. All right, so now we're going to jump into the install. We already have a lot of the dirty work done on the car, pulling all the stock stuff off. First, we're going to do the rack relocation. So if you're not doing the rack relocation, you can go ahead and skip this next part of the video and jump into the install. All right, so here we have the entire front Wisefab rack relocation kit. The cool thing about this kit is it actually comes with its own jig. They make it super easy to do this whole install. As long as you can read and follow instructions and do some basic kindergarten arts and crafts here, you can pretty much do this install yourself. They send very detailed instructions, and actually in these instructions, they include templates of everything that you actually need to cut on the subframe. Once you get all of that cut out, you bolt the rack relocation to the jig, and you can bolt that to the subframe, and it positions everything in the perfect location, so you don't have to second guess yourself. It goes on, it sits in one spot, you weld it on, super easy, makes life easy. Okay. So we got all of our templates cut out, we got the subframe kind of cleaned up. We're going to set these all on there now. We can trace them, mark our lines for where we're going to cut, and then we can go to town cutting it up. Ellie, hey, do you think if I gave this marker to you, you could mark all of these out and set this up? Do you think you'd be able to?
How do I mark them?
With a marker.
Like,
do you think that sounds hard?
No.
There you go. Even a 9-year-old could do it.
I'm 8.
Well, even an 8-year-old could do it. The templates all have the holes in the subframe marked out, so you can line everything up really good. And then these are notches when the subframe is actually mounted in here, or the new relocation. These are clearances for the bolt holes, so you want to make sure you get those. We got all the templates drawn up. Now it's time to start cutting. This battery's dead. Once you get the perimeter, all the templates cut, there's a couple of internal braces in these cross members that you need to get to. One of them, you can see where they're welded. There's one right here, one here, and then there's also typically, once you cut through with the cutoff wheel, if you look in here, there's one more piece that always gets kind of stuck. So we just have to get in there with the sawzall at an angle and cut through that, and then it should fall right off. And then you have to restart. Hopefully it just pops right off. Yeah. Boom. There you go. Now you can see, after the fact, you can see what you all had to cut off. So we have the 4 braces across the bottom, and then there's some little connections here and stuff that you got to cut. But that's all there is to it. It's that easy. An 8-year-old can do it. So we've got the jig here, and what this is going to do is it just sits right over the subframe like this. They include all of the hardware in the kit. So yeah, we just bolt this guy on here. It just uses the factory, or not the factory, but the steering rack mounts. So we've got the jig bolted on. Now we're going to take, or here I can actually pull this off and you can see it a little bit better. So here's our relocation with the jig bolted on. It comes with the bolts, 2 different spacers. This is going to go where the stock control arm goes. And then these are the spacers that will hold the rack relocation jig off of the subframe. So we got 2 of those, 1 for each side. One thing that you want to do also on these after you get the front cut out, on the inside where the control arm goes, we have these little locating tabs which help locate the factory control arms and hold them in place. With the Wisefab, the heims are a little bit bigger, so we want to get rid of these tabs. It makes it a lot easier to slide the control arm in and out when we're installing it. So this is, we got it all cut out. This is just sitting in here. Now what we need to do is take those steering rack mounts off, and we're going to bolt the jig onto the rack relocation, which then will bolt to the subframe and locate everything perfectly. So at the beginning of the video when I said on the template not to forget to notch this out, this is why. So there's a couple spots where the rack goes on a little bit farther, there's a bigger gap than you really want to see when you're welding. So I usually just take a hammer and flatten out this guy here. Makes it a little easier to weld up. The top is pretty good. Sometimes there's a little bit on the back. This looks pretty good though, so it should be good. All right, so there it is, all welded in. We got everything welded. We got the plug welds in the center, and everything looks really good. So we're gonna send this off, get it cleaned up, painted, and then we can install it. All right, now that we have the steering rack relocation welded in and the paint is starting to dry, we can go ahead and jump on the steering rack and start installing all of the parts on here. These are the steering rack bushings. These are special for the Wisefab relocation. They have a little centrifugal cutout, I guess here, or a recession where it fits nicely inside of the relocation kit. We can, we'll go ahead and press these into the steering rack. We've also got our tie rod adapters, which screw into the end of the steering rack. We can get those on. That way we can install the entire steering rack into the new relocated subframe. So there's a couple ways you can install these. The easiest way that I've found is just with a simple bench vise. You can also use a press, or even in a pinch I've done it with a hammer and a socket at the racetrack. Not exactly the most ideal way to do it, but this works really good. So all we're gonna do is we'll find just a socket that fits over that recession, and we can set that on there, and then we need another socket to sit on the outside of the steering rack, hold it in the vise, and we can just tighten it up and it'll press these right in. So the one socket, that's just gonna rest up against the face of the rack. We've got not enough hands. Got the other socket is just gonna rest over that bump there. This is gonna be fun. And then you can see, we'll just make sure we get it straight. If you start to go crooked a little bit, it'll bind up in there and it's not gonna wanna press in smooth. So we've got our socket on the back, right on the front, and it just pushes in that easy. Also make sure you push them in the right way because they're not super easy to get out. And there we have it. All right, now we can go ahead and install our inner tie rod spacer adapters. I guess they're kind of both. On these, we're gonna wanna put a little bit of red Loctite on the threads. We definitely don't want these coming loose, and if they do come loose, they can wobble around and destroy the threads on either the adapter or the steering rack, which we definitely don't want. So I always put a little bit of Loctite on there, and then I'll go ahead and finger tighten them in either end. A little trick when you're tightening these, it's best if you can hold the rack at either end when you tighten those. If you have the rack, say, in the car, or if you just hold the rack solid and then tighten one, you're basically putting all that rotational force on the steering gear, which is not meant to be twisted and have pressure put on it in that way. So what I like to do is, if you have the option, I'll just stick the steering rack, or if you have another buddy with you or whatever, you can have somebody hold the other end of the steering rack. That way, when you go to tighten these, you're putting all the rotational force in that shaft and not on the gear inside the rack. You gotta make sure your vise is tight. There we go. That's all there is to it. Now we can go ahead and get this thing installed in our new cross member. An 8-year-old could do it. Okay, so we're gonna start with the rear here. We already have all the stock components off the car, so the hard part's done. Now we can go ahead and start installing all of the Wisefab stuff. I like to start with the lower arms. They're always the easiest to put on there and let them hang down. And then we can jump to the knuckle and the upper part. The first thing we're going to do is install the anti-squat bracket right inside of the subframe. So this guy, slide up and behind, just like that. See, it bolts in there nice. We'll have the lower control arm bolt, which is the factory bolt, goes right back in. And then we have one bolt that goes right through here to hold it flush. I always install everything hand tight until you get all the bolts in. That way it just makes everything easy to move around. If you don't get bound up. Then we got arm number 5. This is our camber or our toe arm. I lost the bolt. Now, one thing when you're installing these, if you don't have eccentric lockouts, if you're running the factory camber bolts here, I always make sure to adjust them all the way in. That way, if you do get hit in an impact, they're already adjusted all the way in. It's going to be able to support the most load and not want to spin that caster bolt and knock your alignment out. I can show you the eccentric back here. I always like to put it all the way in, again, for durability. All right, so now we got the upper control arm. This will go in. It's a little easier if you do the lower first, because then you don't have the upper in your way, hitting your head all the time. So another tip when you put these in, I always like to put the bolts in from the inside. If you put them in from the outside, sometimes it's hard to get to the bolt if they do bend or anything. Then on this front arm, we actually have a little spacer in here. And what that's for is if you're going from this upper mount to the lower, the length of the arm changes just a little bit. In the upper position, the washer, you can see there's a space there, the washer goes on the outside. If you switch to the lower position, which is the lower anti-squat, when it goes down here, then you move the washer to the inside. And just the geometry changes just a little bit, and that's why you need this spacer. Always fun to try and get all these in here. This is why when I put them together, you'll start with it hand tight. That way there's a little bit of play and everything. This nut's a little tricky. You can see it's a custom machined nut. So if you look up in here, that bolt comes through just above the upper control arm mount. So there's very little space in there. So you kind of have to push the bolt back out and then line this nut up with the outside. Let's see. There we go. So you can see right there, it slides kind of right around that, that upper control arm mount. And then you can thread this guy in from there. Very snug fit. Now we can go ahead and hang the knuckle on here. Another little trick, put the bolt in from the rear. If you have it in from the front, then when everything's together, if you need to pull the shock off, the front control or the upper control arm gets in the way. So it's easy to put the nut on this side, bolt in from the back. Then we can go ahead and slide the upper control arm in. This one can be a little tricky too. We've got parts falling. So we've got 2 spacers, these go on the bottom. And then we have obviously our camber adjustment. You got this hung, you can slide the bolt halfway through. And then you'll grab your spacers. You can slide those in underneath the control arm and then slide the bolt through. And then I usually set this right in the center to start with. And then once we get all 4 wheels on the car and on the ground, we can adjust from there. So now that we have the knuckle hung up and the upper control arm mounted, it makes it really easy to just slide the lower control arms in. You don't have to hold anything up because the coilover is doing all the work. So once we have the coilover on, the upper control arm on, the knuckle hangs there nice. So it's really easy just to lift the arms up into place and slide the bolts in. So another cool thing about these knuckles is these are kind of a universal Z knuckle. So these work for 370Z and 350Z. The difference being the traction arm here. On the 350Z, you've got this really long arm that goes all the way to the rear of the knuckle. On the 370Z, they're much shorter, And the subframes are obviously different on the 370, so it makes that arm a little different. So yeah, that's something kind of cool. Same with the front kit. The front kit is actually the same as a 370Z kit. The knuckles are the same, the lower control arms, the upper control arms, all the same thing for the 370 and 350. There's just a few mounting brackets that are different. All right, so we got the driver's side done. Now we're gonna jump over and do the exact same thing over here. All right, now we'll jump to the front kit. We've got it all laid out here. Just like in the rear, we're going to start with the lower control arms and work our way up from there. Another little trick on these, on the lower control arm on the bottom, make sure you put the bolt in from the back. If you put it in from the front, if you put it in from the back, you can't get that bolt out with the tie rod and the steering rack in the way. On the shock bolt, you're going to want to make sure that you put the bolt in from the rear. If you do it the other way, the excess bolt hanging out can interfere with the tie rod back here. So you want to make sure you have as much clearance back here as you can. So another trick that I like to do on these chassis, this won't apply if you're on a stock car, but if you're building a car, from the factory, these bolts, they're threaded in from the outside, and then there's a captured nut out here. The problem with running them from the inside is you have to remove the coilover in order to take the upper control arm off. What I always like to do is tack weld a nut on the inside, get rid of the cage out here, and then you're able to thread the bolts in easily from the outside. It makes taking the upper control arm on and off much easier. These are on-car adjustable. When we put these on, we're going to make sure the Allen heads are on the bottom. If they're on the top, you really can't get to them to adjust on the car. So we'll slide this guy in. On the bottom of the knuckle here, we've got 3 different mounting points. We have, this is where the control arm mounts to. This is going to be our bump stop. And then right here is going to be our tie rod. And our tie rod comes with different offset. These are our Ackerman spacers. So this will adjust the Ackerman of the car. You can see the actual tie rod hole is slotted to account for the different Ackerman. This is a 0, so this is basically dead center in the middle of the hole. Then we've got 2mm and 4mm offset Ackerman spacers. Once we get this bolted onto the arm, then we'll be able to adjust the bump stop. You can see they've got different numbered dots on the bump stop. The lowest number, number 1, that's going to be the highest angle that you can get with the kit. So typically we have it set on 1. If you have a lower powered car, or you just want to set the max steering angle a little bit lower, you can use this. You can see as you rotate it, it's off-centered. And then this contacts the lower control arm and sets our bump stop. With the lower control arm mounted up, the coilover, again, just like the rear, holds on to everything, so we can set the knuckle on and not have to hold all the suspension up in place. So it works pretty good, starting at the bottom and working your way up from there. The opening in the front and the rear of the knuckle are just big enough to fit a 3/4 inch wrench through, or a 19 mil, and makes it easy to hold these nuts inside while you tighten the bolts on the bottom. You're just going to bottom the knuckle out on the control arm. You can see it hits nice and flat right there, and you can rotate it. Whatever number is hitting the control arm, that's going to be your offset. So this is going to be the highest offset bump stop. That's going to give us the most angle, and we always set it right there. And you can just tighten the bolt up. Now you can see, if you look underneath, this is the number 1, and it's going to hit nice and flat on the lower control arm, giving us a nice solid bump stop. It'll prevent us from over centering and give the car a great feel at lock. All right, now we can go ahead and install the steering shaft spacer. Before we put that on, I like to clean up the splines on the steering shaft itself. It makes it much easier to slide on and off when we do need to eventually one day take the steering rack in or out of the car. It's nice to be able to slide this around, and those get super gunked up and it makes everything hard to come apart. So I like to make sure it's all nice and clean before it goes together and make life easier in the future. So you can see now it slides really nice. So we're all set there. All right, so now we've got the rear of the arm bolted in. Sometimes the front takes a little bit of messing around with. I usually like to use a pry bar and try and shove that heim up into where it's supposed to go. If you start out with the front arm and then try and put the back on, you kind of end up in the same boat, and it's kind of tricky to get it all together. So I usually like to start with tightening down the rear, or just getting it on and starting the nut loose, and then going underneath and trying to get this arm up. It can fight with you a little bit. All right, so we got the Wisefab all installed. We're right around 65 to 70 degrees of angle on this kit now. Now that it's all bolted on, our next step is going to be the alignment. So you can be sure to tune in next time, and we'll have another video on setting everything up with the Ackerman, the camber caster, and all the other little tips and tricks you'll need to know. So tune in on Sundays and we'll have a new video up, and yeah, check it out then.